Hi there, this is Laura Dovalo and I'm back after a break with a spring or summer themed interactive card featuring Lawn Fawn products. When the slider panel is pulled, a secret message is revealed and the 3 flowers actually grow a couple of inches. I hope you join me for a step-by-step tutorial of this double slider card, which is quite easy to make. I have simply taken advantage of the upwards movement of the mechanism to attach the 3 flowers to it. Now let's begin. I started with a 4.5 inch or 11 cm wide panel of Nina Solar White cardstock, to which I previously glued 2 pieces of patterned paper. I hadn't yet figured out the length of my panel, because I wanted to make sure that my elements would fit nicely. It ended up measuring 6 3/4 inch, or 17 centimeters. I penciled in a mark at the 2 inch or 5.5 centimeter point and used my 1 inch Fiskars hole punch to create an opening in my panel. Next I attached Lawn Fawn's Hello die with some tape and rolled it through my die cutting machine. This is one of my absolutely favorite word dies. I covered a strip of thin printer paper with double-sided adhesive and glued it to the back of my panel so that I could inlay first the tiny pieces of the inside of the letters, and then, after adding a couple of extra layers to it, the hello sentiment itself. As you can see, I used the die cut as a template to insert the pieces in their correct places. Then I grabbed some strong liquid adhesive, layered the 4 die cut words and inserted my homemade chipboard in its place. I could have used even more layers, but I didn't want it to stand out too much and draw attention from the flowers and the fairies. After that, I was ready to cut my super long stems. I used this die set called Little Flowers and the partial die cutting technique to cut mine out of score tape covered cilantro green cardstock. I placed my upper cutting pad like this before rolling the whole thing through my machine, but if you don't have this die set, you could use any flower and just cut a couple of strips about 1/8 inch wide and 4 inches long. In centimeters, this would be 3 millimeters by 10 centimeters. Next, I drew the rest of my stems with the help of a ruler and a pencil, and then I used a craft knife to carefully cut them out. I repeated the partial die cutting a second time using acetate, because I knew that a strip of cardstock wouldn't be sturdy enough for the mechanism. This time I simply used a pair of scissors to get rid of the extra acetate. The following step was to die cut 3 flower pots and 3 extra flower pot brims, not really sure what you call those pieces, out of craft colored cardstock with score tape on the back. I then used Rusty Hinge Distress ink to give them a more realistic look. The flowers also underwent some treatment to give them more volume. I used a stylus with a ball point and some thick foam to do this. It's actually incredible what a difference gently rubbing the paper makes. Assembling the flowers was a piece of cake. I just used a couple of drops of multi-medium matte adhesive for the daisies and a piece of foam adhesive for the tulip. I also added a layer of glossy accents to the center of the flowers to give them some shine and volume. I think that they turned out really cute, although some shading would have made them stand out even more. Now it was time to glue the flower pots in place, and since I used the inlay technique for the panel, there were no uncomfortable bumps to be careful of. I just needed to make sure to leave enough room for the flower stems. I grabbed my sharp craft knife and cut 3 slits in the panel, making them wider than I needed. Of course, if you want your flowers to grow really straight, these slits have to be narrower, maybe just 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. But I wanted to follow the shape of the die cut and not have to worry about widening the opening later on. And now I can insert my 3 flowers in the slits. The final detail before making my slider mechanism was to glue the flower pot brims in place, and this added a nice touch. I trimmed a piece of craft heavyweight cardstock to 4.5 inches by 6 3/4 of an inch, in other words 11 by 17 centimeters, which is the same size as my panel, and then I drew pencil lines 1/2 inch from all the borders. Here I'm shading the pieces that I'll need to cut out. This is going to be a groove so that my strip of cellophane doesn't slide sideways. I used both scissors and a craft knife to cut them out. Note to myself, brush your hair extra carefully before making a video tutorial. I used one of those 12 by 12 inch cellophane bags that come with scrapbook paper to cut a 3.5 inch or 9 centimeter wide strip, but of course I didn't remember to measure the length of it. Sorry about that. I attached it with a strip of score tape and made sure it slit perfectly before moving on to the next step. For the sliding panel I started with a 3 1/8 of an inch by 11 inches or 8 centimeters by 28 centimeters strip of the same craft heavyweight cardstock, and I didn't trim it until later on because I wasn't quite sure how long it needed to be. I attached it to the cellophane with a strip of score tape. This would be the back of my mechanism, so I made sure the right side of the craft cardstock would be seen. Next, I attached 2 strips of foam tape to the sides of the mechanism and tiny strips of score tape to the end of my stems. I had the flowers inserted to the starting position and attached with washi tape on the front of the panel so that they wouldn't move during this very crucial step. I removed the backing of the score tape and revealed some of the sticky of the foam tape in order to have some wiggle room in case I didn't glue the panel on straight. But everything went smoothly, so I removed the rest of the release paper and the tape strips as well. Now I could trim my sliding panel safely, so I used a pencil to draw a line and my paper trimmer to do the rest. You can see that it's working perfectly. Let's stamp our sentiment on it. I'm glad I have a large stamping tool because I needed to stamp it a couple of times before getting it right. I also ended up cutting the stamp so that it would fit on my narrow strip. To make a really sturdy pull tab, I layered a whole bunch of half circles that I cut with my 1-inch hole punch, maybe 6 layers of cardstock or so. Off camera, I made it fit perfectly in the hole by filing it with a nail file. Next, I added foam tape to the back of my mechanism and attached it to my card base, which measures 9 inches by 6 3/4 of an inch or 22 centimeters by 17 centimeters. I added a tiny red triangle to my pull tab so that the receiver of the card knows what to do with it. And now the card is almost finished. Before I wrap this up, let me just show you why I went with the no-line coloring of the fairies, although I'm no expert in this technique. These fairies are so cute, but they looked out of place in this almost realistic looking card. Those black lines were just too harsh. So I stamped them in a very light ink and used a mixture of Copic markers and Prismacolor pencils to color them. I also added glitter to their wings with distress stickles, which is one of my favorite products. Another dilemma was that it made no difference how I placed the fairies on my panel. 2 of them would end up covered by the flowers, but I didn't really mind, since the main characters of the card, to me, are the flowers. What do you think? Here are a couple of pictures of the card so that you can see all the details, volume and texture. I hope you have enjoyed this tutorial, and if you need more information, like a complete list of materials, feel free to visit my blog. There's a direct link in the description box. Bye bye, hasta luego.